Great. Next question, Jenny.
One quick interview. Secretary Besson, you just said again Secretary Besson, you just said again that the biggest problem in the relationship is China's overcapacity and that you want them to move towards a new consumption-based economy. What's your specific plan for addressing those economic imbalances besides purchases of U.S. goods? And then do you want me to go to Jameson now? Sorry, Ambassador. Okay. And then, obviously, the Section 232 investigations that the president is set to unveil in the coming weeks on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors would theoretically hit China after as well as everyone else in the world. After your talks today, will those tariffs be imposed on the Chinese, or did you make any commitments to pause them or not target the Chinese specifically with those actions? And then what would you say is the biggest concessions that the Chinese have had to make in these talks so far?
I'll just repeat that China is the most imbalanced economy in modern times, and I think we are going. They're 30% of global manufacturing. They have a 2% current account surplus of global GDP, which we've never seen before, or probably not since the 1870s with the British Empire, and that's not sustainable. So the tariff levels will have quite a bit to do with that. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that President Trump was very early on talking about the China problem. The U.S. experienced the China shock when China came into the WTO in the early 2000s, but Europe, a lot of the European business model, it was quite a business model, was predicated on cheap Russian energy, a depressed exchange rate because of the southern European countries dragging down the euro and then selling goods into China. And now that China has jiu-jitsu'd the model, and under the cover of COVID, rather than increasing their consumer, they upped their export capacity, and they did it quite a bit up the value chain. So, we'll see over time. But my guess is that over time, that the other economies, developed economies, will start increasing their tariff barriers, and the global South, they just can't absorb all this Chinese production.
I would say also, when you ask about what tools can be used to deal with this, I mean, this is part of the reason why the president implemented his tariff program. Right now, if you look at the numbers, we're still tracking an annual trade deficit with China. But if you extrapolate it out from the numbers we have so far it looks like it's going to be at least $50 billion smaller this year. So that's some progress already. With respect to the Section 232, this came up during discussions. The Chinese asked us about it. What's the plan? What's the timing? We shared what information we could. You've heard President Trump talk about this publicly, which includes discussion of having a situation where you start with a lower tariff, but then you go to a higher tariff at some point to try to bring back manufacturing of pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. These are global actions. They don't target the Chinese. They don't target any particular country. They'll be applied globally. There aren't any exceptions or exemptions for particular countries.
And what's the biggest concession they've made?
That the Chinese have made? Well, I would say they blocked all of their rare earth magnets, and now we're getting them.
Great. Next question, please, Gavin.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. I'm just wondering if we can get some clarity on the tariff level that is threatened to happen on April 12th. I know the April 2nd tariffs were 34%. You add that to the fentanyl, 54%. That's where the tariffs are for many goods right now. So what is the overall threat to the Chinese in terms of a tariff level that could happen if there is no extension?
Well, I think you've seen, I've used the word boomerang. So if we boomerang back to the April 2nd level, they would go to 34. I noticed, as the earlier question said, that the Chinese deputy minister did say that we had agreed on a pause. We have not. Nothing is agreed until we speak with President Trump. He's on Air Force One, I believe, doing a press conference right now, and we will be seeing him in the Oval tomorrow to go over the deal with him, and then he'll decide if the pause continues as is.
And just to be clear, Gavin, the president has discretion to change the rate depending on the circumstances that we have, et cetera. So while the snapback rate would be 34%, he, of course, has discretion under the law to modify that.
Yeah.
We have some breaking news. A top Chinese official now says Beijing has agreed to extend its tariff truce with the U.S. after an intense 2 days of talks between the world's two largest economies. Very few details have been given so far. We don't even know how long this extension will last. But earlier this morning, the president denied that he was seeking a summit with President Xi, although he did leave the door open to visiting China if an invitation was extended. Joining us now, Natasha Sarin, professor at Yale University and president of the Yale Budget Lab. First of all, I want to get your reaction to this extension. Is there any way to read this besides good news? At least they're going to keep talking.
Well, I think the challenge is it's good news. Obviously, we should keep talking, and China is an incredibly important trading partner and, frankly, a really important relationship for the United States to try and navigate. The challenge, though, is that so much of what the administration has been saying over the course of the last few weeks in the lead up to this August 1st deadline is that August 1st is the deadline. And at that point, you're going to see a lot of certainty with respect to how these trade deals are ultimately going to land. And now you're in a situation with arguably the most important and consequential of these particular dynamics where we're kind of kicking the can down the road again, and frankly, an indefinite period with respect to when American businesses and American consumers can really start to understand what the new trade landscape is going to look like.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about the rest of the world, August 1st, just for folks who aren't looking at their calendar, is Friday, right? And just this morning, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, talked on CNBC with a message for the rest of the world about those tariffs. Take a listen.
China is their own thing. We have our own team working with China. They're their own thing. For the rest of the world, we're going to have things done by Friday. And Friday is not that far away. So you should expect, we said, August 1st is the date that we're setting all these rates. And they are off to the races after that.
So this comes after President Trump basically said, I got a baseline for the rest of the world. It's 15 to 20% because you can't sit down and make 200 different deals with 200 different countries. But is this a sign tariffs could be here to stay rather than a point of negotiation?
Well, I think that's kind of what the administration has made clear. Howard Lutnick earlier this week was talking about the fact that these tariffs are going to bring in a very substantial amount of revenue. The work that my colleagues and I did at the Yale Budget Lab estimates that the current tariffs that are in place represent an increase in revenue of about $3 trillion over the course of the next 10 years. And actually, like the administration, we should give some credit where credit is due. Frankly, we are in a fiscal position where we really do need to raise revenue. It's just that tariffs are a remarkably bad way to raise revenue because what they do is they place the burden of paying those tariffs and paying those taxes on low and middle income Americans who are disproportionately the ones that are consuming large shares of their income and are the ones who are watching price increases across the board for literally everything that they buy.
Yeah, you and I were talking in the break going in that we've been noticing price increases for various things that we've been shopping for lately. Look, the Republican Senator Josh Hawley has introduced new legislation that would provide a tariff rebate, essentially, a check for $600 per adult and child to American families. I mean, actually, Donald Trump was asked about this recently in the last couple of days, and he said, you know, maybe it is something we will look at. But can that make up for the extra costs that people will incur if we're looking at potentially a 15, 20% tariff?
Well, again, the idea behind using this tariff revenue as a way to deal with our fiscal position comes on the heels of the fact that the administration has just pushed for a $3 trillion tax and spending package that disproportionately benefits the very top who see very large tax cuts. And so at least what has been argued is like, OK, don't worry about the fact that we blew up the deficit by several $trillions because we're going to get all of this revenue from tariffs that's then going to allow us to be in a more fiscally tenable position. But if in reality, then you're just going to rebate all of the money that you're collecting, then you're in the same fiscal position you were before. You have trillions of dollars that have been spent and no real concept or way for how you're going to get us back to any place of balance. And why that matters for real Americans is because when the government has all this debt outstanding, they have to pay people more in order to be willing to hold that debt. And those higher interest rates ricochet down into the economy. They mean higher mortgage rates for consumers and higher rates on car loans and on student loans. So all of this like really deeply matters and isn't actually a way in which you want the government to be operating.
Natasha Sarin, thank you.
O'Leary Ventures, great to have you. Just want to read to you this Wall Street Journal column headline by Gerard Baker. If Trump's tariffs are so bad, where's the recession? In their rush to emphasize the negatives, economists might have overlooked countervailing forces. Your take on the highs and lows of all this?
Still being negotiated. I think the headline for investors like me that have to do business within this policy is we're trying to avoid the noise in terms of all of the back and forth rhetoric and trying to nail down what is the actual number that we're going to be dealing with, either inbound or outbound. Europe's a huge market. You know, this makes sense for this reason. Europe always had a value-added tax in almost every country against U.S. products going in there. Call it 13%. So you would think a reciprocal 13-ish% would be absorbed by both sides easily. That's not quite what happened here. We're more above 20. And the only reason Europe, and remember, they have to negotiate as a collective, 26 different entities, like one person or 5-person team negotiating for them. Already the French and the German are whining this morning about this deal, or this potential deal. But the only reason they care is pharmaceuticals and automotive. We are so huge to them in those sectors, so huge, so massive, so important that they have to come to the table. And you know, this is a big deal, and so that's why you're hearing, oh yeah, we'll invest $500 billion here and all that. They're going to move these pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities to the U.S. because this is their market. And so Trump's getting that win, but I don't think we're done yet. I mean, the EU is it's the biggest deal there is.
You're making the case that the headwinds will come from the other EU partners against this deal?
I'm saying the headwinds are in the details. You know, already they want protections against things like automotive in their direction. Oh, we don't sell many cars. Nobody's buying a Ford 150 truck in Switzerland or in France. You can't fit them on the street, let alone your driveway. So,
but isn't this the problem with the EU fundamentally? Is that a handful of people make decisions in Brussels that affect all the countries? And that takes us back to Brexit 5 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Although the British wish they hadn't done that for a bunch of other reasons.
They wish they were part of the EU.
Yeah, they wish they were, because you have negotiating leverage. That's the upside. I think what people are liking about it from the investment community, at least I am, is we're getting some certainty that it's not going to be 50% or 35%, because we can't live with that. And clearly, no one's ever done this kind of thing in 6 months. So we know that the actual agreements will take another year or two to work out. And all of this is one big basket, all these countries. And then the other thing is China. China is a different deal, completely different deal.
Let's go to that now, Dana.
Well, yeah, President Trump just tweeted, put this on Truth Social. He said, I am not seeking anything in regards to China talks. I may go to China, but it would only be at the invitation of President Xi, which has been extended, otherwise no interest. So back and forth as we go on China.
That's noise. This is a negotiation. This is what Trump does. It's back and forth. He puts it out during the weekend. He puts it out everybody understands what he's doing. The dance with China is a different dance completely, because it's not just tariffs. It's economic warfare. It's AI warfare. It's access to their markets. It's World Trade Organization disputes. It's what they're doing here. It's TikTok. It's so many different things that there's no way on earth this deal is going to get negotiated by, August 1st. Impossible. And so I think they're going to get treated differently with a different negotiating group. The whole world's watching this one because,
it's the big one.
Well, it is a big one, but also China has never played by the rules. And I'm an advocate for getting this worked out now. I mean, we have been doing this for 30 years, and they have constantly never abided by whatever covenants have been put in place. It looks like this deal will have consequences. There may be some good things, some bad things. I mean, TikTok is in chaos right now. It's a big asset here. And I would have said last week they'll provide another extension because it's now become a pawn in this negotiating deal with Xi. But now I understand, listening to some of the lawmakers, they're done with extensions. And I care because I'm trying to buy it. I'm one of the buying groups. I now think there's more than a 50-50 chance that it goes dark. So, and that doesn't mean we can't negotiate a deal, but they're going to shut it off midnight, September 17th, like they've done once before. Remember, India shut this thing down just a few years ago. The only problem for that is ByteDance right now can say it's only 8% of our market cap, which is true. But if the U.S. turns this off permanently, then Canada will turn it off. Then Europe will start turning it off, because what it really is spyware. So if you're a shareholder in ByteDance this morning, you're going, oh, wow. What can we do? And so they threw out this idea. We'll rewrite the code and deliver it on September 5th. But it's the same guys that wrote the first spyware, writing the second spyware. So we got a lot of stuff going on with China.
My guess is 90-day extension. We'll see what happens.
Not a chance.
Okay, all right. I'm going to say 90 days.
You heard it here first.
Right, just string it out.
I think this time, zero probability.
Okay, I dig it. Okay, cool. Thanks, Kevin. Nice to see you.
And President Trump's trade agreement with the European Union came just 4 days after Japan also agreed to 15% tariffs and major investments in the United States. But some economic experts fear the new deals are unbalanced and could hurt economic growth. Meanwhile, the White House is moving on, as this week top officials from the Trump administration are meeting with their Chinese counterparts for their third round of economic talks. High stakes there. Joining us now, senior economics reporter for Axios, Courtney Brown. Courtney, let's just start with the response to the EU deal. The fact that you've got countries like France now coming out and saying, wait a minute, what did we actually get here? That's, I think, where economic analysts are coming up with this unbalanced idea. What do you think countries are learning about dealing with the Trump administration if they're willing to make deals that other countries are saying, well, what did we actually get for that?
It is the era of asymmetric deals. We've seen this with Japan. Now Europe is the latest to sit back and question, what is it that we actually got here? What did the U.S. concede in this deal? Because it seems like we conceded a lot. It reminds me of when I was a teenager and I asked my parents for a nice car, and your parents say, you're lucky you get any car at all. And I think that is what's happening here, because I asked my sources, what is it that the EU got out of this? And my sources said, well, they didn't get a trade war. Could have been much worse. 15% is pretty good considering it could have been 50 or 30, So I think that's what they have to sit with. It could have been worse.
It could have been worse, but that's not necessarily the way that the U.S. has ever dealt with its allies when it comes to trade, especially when our global markets are so intertwined. The question that I asked the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer when he was on with us on Morning Joe yesterday was, what does this ultimately mean for consumers? And can they guarantee that prices won't go up? He did not guarantee that. Instead, he just said, well, we're looking at the data and we don't have a reason to think inflation is coming back. I was talking to you about that in the break. What's your response to what they're saying about this?
We are starting to see subtle signs of prices going up for all of the goods that are subject to tariffs thus far. So we know that the inflation pressures aren't insane, but they're starting to bubble up. And this is the way it would happen, right? It would start to happen slowly as businesses start to think, okay, I can't take the hit on all of this. I have to start to pass it along to consumers. And that's what we're starting to see in the inflation report. And the next test is, well, what about the broader economy? Are businesses saying, I'm going to hold off on hiring? We haven't seen that yet. But Friday, big jobs report for July. I think economists are going to be watching exactly for that.
Because, again, I think you and I have hammered this before, the idea that all of the consequences of this trade war so far have really been delayed, in large part because the deadlines around when these deals or these punitive tariffs snap into place have really been slip-sliding all over the calendar. And so businesses may not have yet had to contend with them. Instead, those who saw the trade war coming kind of stocked up early, and now their stockpiles are diminishing, and this is replenishment season.
This is the big test, right? So they rushed to get all they thought they would need from overseas before tariffs took effect. And, that was a few months ago now. So those stockpiles are running down as consumers buy and the seasons are changing. And they're going to have to import more things at these higher tariff rates. And so how do they respond? This is a big question for the Federal Reserve, right? They are trying to figure out how much of it is going to be passed along to the consumer. How much do businesses eat? How much do their profits take a hit, and how much ultimately has to be passed on to the consumer and shows up on the shelf in the form of higher prices. So,
yeah, that's going to be a lot, I think, for us to watch. Are there mile markers this week or in the coming weeks that you're keeping a close eye on? I know you said jobs report Friday.
What a week.
What a week.
This is such a week. This is, one economist I talked to said that this is the busiest week in his 25 years of being an economist. He had vacation on the calendar and had to cancel that really quick because of so many things that's going on this week. So we have the jobs report, as I mentioned on Friday. We have the Fed's go-to inflation indicators coming out this week. Today, we are going to get some figures on layoffs and quits and hiring, also closely watched by the Federal Reserve. And of course, we have the big Fed decision on Wednesday. We know that the Fed is probably not going to raise rates, but the big question is
lower.
Not going to lower rates. Oh my gosh, I'm stuck in another era. They are not going to lower rates on Wednesday. But the big question is how many members of the Fed board say maybe we should have lowered rates today? That's the big thing to watch.
Big thing to watch both for us and then also the president, who's been urging rates to be lowered a lot. Courtney Brown, as always, thank you very much. And I'm sure it was great to just get any car in high school. I was of that mindset as well.
Better than a bike.
Better than a bike. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Donald Trump is back on the mic talking about cutting a great deal with China. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we've heard this song before over and over again. From the disastrous trade war that never delivered to the chaotic tariff threats that spooked markets and crushed American farmers, Trump's latest bluff feels less like a plan and more like déjà vu. Let's be clear. This isn't about strategy, it's about showmanship. Trump isn't negotiating with China, he's negotiating with headlines, throwing out buzzwords like tough, fair, and winning, while ignoring the very real consequences these moves have on working Americans. What's most stunning is how the conservative media machine amplifies these empty gestures, spinning every vague promise as some kind of masterstroke while glossing over the economic fallout. Look at the numbers. American consumers paid billions more during the last tariff surge, and industries like manufacturing and agriculture took hits they still haven't recovered from. And yet, here we are again, with Trump suggesting that more tariffs and tougher talk will somehow bring China to its knees, despite literally zero evidence that it worked last time. Meanwhile, economists and even members of his own team are scrambling to make sense of the noise, offering contradictory timelines, half-explained exemptions, and promises of fiscal responsibility that somehow always include massive handouts to corporations. On the flip side, progressive voices are rightly asking, what's the plan beyond the bluster? What are the measurable goals? How do we avoid punishing low- and middle-income families who bear the brunt of rising costs? Instead of answers, we get more fog, more backpedaling, more contradictions, more Trumpism 101, create a mess, blame someone else, then pretend to fix it with a bigger mess. And let's not forget how this whole deal talk also conveniently distracts from real issues like AI regulation, pharmaceutical monopolies, and actual global alliances. China's not sitting still, they've moved up the value chain, doubled down on exports, and strengthened ties with countries the US keeps sidelining. So if Trump thinks chest thumping will magically shift the balance, he's not just wrong, he's dangerously naive. This isn't 2016. The world has changed, the stakes are higher, and empty threats carry real consequences. So here's the big question. Are we really going to let a second Trump term repeat the same economic trauma under the illusion of deal-making? Or will we finally demand a strategy rooted in reality, fairness, and actual benefit for working people, not billionaire talking points? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is Trump bluffing again, or is this the prelude to Trade War 2.0? Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video if you're tired of political theater masquerading as policy. Let's talk about it.